So now I'd like to introduce Jim Lundy, who's the CEO of Alliance Bank.
I'm really pleased to be here with the Alliance Bank team. Good to see so many old friends. Probably the oldest friend, both in terms of chronology and age, is the mayor. My wife this morning said, "You see Jerry, you know, and you go complain about something, you know." But Jerry and I went to law school together a long time ago, and actually practiced law together for several years. So I was pleased that he came on a personal note, but on a personal and a professional note. I'm so glad he was elected, and while he's got a great sense of humor and can certainly poke fun at himself, you know, he'll take this job very seriously, and I think he'll be a great leader for Flagstaff. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for coming. Bruce Nordstrom, also another old guy. You know, it's kind of nice to see. You know, and I can tie this in a little bit. And Dwayne Freshley, who is the president of Western Alliance Bank, and I'm the CEO, and I'll talk about that in a second. But you know, it's good to see people that we've known. But there's an underlying theme here, and the dean mentioned that Sherry was a student in his class, and the theme I think everybody can catch on to is you know, commitment to the community, commitment to the business community, and commitment to economic development. And I think that's why I got into banking, and that's why most of us got into banking that are here today, because we do, you know, care about businesses and businesses' growth, and realize that that's the lifeblood of the economy. And I think that particularly with what's gone on, there's been a couple of major movements. You know, the one that, you know, occurred about 4.5 years ago, when we had the housing bubble-driven crisis and the financial crisis. You know, that reminds us that things can get overheated. But even before that, the tremendous consolidation that started going on in the banking industry in the mid-'80s, and we haven't quite sorted out what's going to happen. But part of the downside of that has been sometimes a disconnect between the financial services industries and you know, and people in communities and business owners, which really, you know, all the politicians, all of us sort of say, gee, small business, medium-sized business, it drives our economy and it's so important. But then there's too often a disconnect between that and our institutions, whether it's government institutions, educational institutions, or financial services institutions. And I think one of the reasons that we were so pleased to do this is it's just a good time with what we really do every day. And so I want to talk a little bit about Alliance Bank. I told Sherry I want to give a little bit of a commercial, a little bit beyond, and I won't keep you here yammering on forever. Dwayne drove, and I talked to him the whole way up, so I'll get hoarse in a little while. But I do want to talk a little bit about what Alliance Bank has done in the state and in Flagstaff. Number one, I'm proud of it, and we're all proud of it. But number two, we've run against the grain. We've run against what you read in the newspapers about the banking industry, both in the state and nationally. And so I think it's a good illustration that despite tough times, despite particularly tough times for our industry, despite a lot of criticism, much of it justified at banks in general, that individual bankers and individual banks can make a difference in the state and in the community. And certainly Sherry and Rob and Greg have made a tremendous difference in Flagstaff. I'll get to a few numbers in a minute. And I think Alliance Bank has made a difference in the state, and I'll talk about that a little bit, because I just, all of those are the reasons we were so pleased and so proud when Sherry brought this opportunity to make a partnership with NAU. And I'm also looking forward to the November economic conference that you've sponsored or done for so many years here. And I think Robert Sarver, our CEO, probably many better known to many of you people here as the owner of the Phoenix Suns. But many of us, including Sherry and Dwayne and myself, have worked for Robert in different, this life, the last 10 years, and in different lifetimes, and know him to be a dynamic banker and a dynamic and a brilliant leader. So I think you'll want to hear what Robert has to say at that conference. But let me give you a little bit of the commercial now. about, you know, why Alliance Bank of Arizona has enough money to make a donation for 2000. You know, even that's a little bit unusual. We are part of, first a little bit about the bank. Our technical name is really Western Alliance Bank. We do business in Arizona, and that's where most of our assets are in Arizona. We do business here as Alliance Bank of Arizona. We also supervise a bank in Reno, Nevada that's about a $450 million bank, and we're about a $1.8 billion bank in Arizona, so you put all those together, we're about a 2.4 on the way to $2.5 billion bank. We are part of Western Alliance Bancorp, which is a 3-bank holding company of about $7.5 billion. It's publicly traded under wall on the New York Stock Exchange. And so we now operate as 3 different banking charters, Western Alliance Bank, and Dwayne Freshley, who's started his banking career in Arizona back in the 70s with the Arizona Bank. He's the president of Western Alliance Bank, so he's the president of all the Arizona and the Northern Nevada operations. The other 2 banks in our holding company are Bank of Nevada, headquartered in Las Vegas. It's also about a $2.5 billion bank, and Torrey Pines Bank, which started about 10 years ago, as we did in Arizona, in the San Diego area, and then has expanded to both the Bay Area more recently and Los Angeles a couple of years ago. That's also a little bit over a $2 billion bank. So you add those all up, and we're a publicly traded regional bank of about $7.5 billion, and that puts us in the top 85 banks in the country. And that just to give you a little perspective on what that means, we've still got, when I got into banking with Dwayne and left practicing law with Jerry, there was probably about 15,000 banks in the country. Today there's about 7,500. So over the last 25 to 30 years, we've seen a tremendous consolidation in the banking industry here. But for example, our neighbors to the north, Canada, they've only got 5 banks. And the banks in Europe, I don't know the numbers, but it's a much more consolidated banking industry. So while, and obviously over the last generation, we formed many new banks, Alliance Bank being one of them, the fact that there's now 7,500 and about over 1,000 have been officially closed by the FDIC as a result of this last crisis, you can tell there's been a consolidation going on. If at $7.5 billion we can be in the top 100 banks in the country, and there's 7,500, we're a whole lot smaller than the Citibanks and the Bank of Americas and the Wells Fargos, which are approaching between $500 billion and $1 trillion in assets. So there are many, many small community banks in the country. Many banks between $250 million and say $1 billion. This is another speech, I won't give it to you now, but my opinion is that one of the economic fallouts from this latest crisis and some of the reaction to it, both the more intense regulatory regimen symbolized by Dodd-Frank, but also the higher capital requirements that banks are now going to need to keep going forward. I think that those things will combine to really accelerate the consolidation of the banking industry in this country, and I think that over the next 3 to 5 years, I would not be surprised to see that 7,500 drop to as low as 5,000. So it's interesting to be towards the end of my career, but in an industry that has so much going on in it. It's not always fun, but at least it's interesting every day. So that gives you sort of a perspective of where Alliance and Western Alliance Bank are. We're only 10 years old. 10 years ago, 10.5 years ago, Robert Sarver called me and Dwayne, and he was living in California at the time. We'd worked with him before. He was out of banking and had been out of banking for about a year. And he said, "You guys interested in getting together with me and starting a bank in Arizona again?" After a little bit of consideration, we decided we were crazy, and we did. And so we started this bank from scratch in Phoenix and Tucson, and opened both banks 10 years ago this next year. We are now, those numbers I gave you, we have been the fastest growing bank that was opened in the country in 2003 anywhere. The bank I mentioned in San Diego started about 6 months after ours. It's been the second fastest growing bank in the country. And then one of the reasons we were able to grow as quickly as we did link up with a bank in Nevada from the get-go. That was a very good thing in many ways because of the infrastructure that they provided in the capital. Although, as we all know, Nevada is the hardest hit region of the country from the financial crisis. And so, our bank has had some tough times, but actually has emerged from those tough times in all markets stronger than almost all of our competitors. And we've done that for a number of reasons. I won't go into all the reasons why we've been able to do that, but now I want to turn a little bit of your attention to what Alliance Bank has been able to accomplish in Arizona in a relatively short period of time. Just in the last 2 years, the net loan growth, and we primarily lend to local businesses and local professionals and local real estate projects. We have put on the books within the state of Arizona over $600 million in net loan growth in the last 24 months. Our average compounded loan growth at the banks that Dwayne and I and Sherry run has been between 15 and 20% through that time period. Nationally, over the last 2 years, banks of our size, $1 billion to $3 billion, have either had negative or only in 2011 finally a little over 1% net loan growth. So it's not just the hardest regions of the country where banks have sort of been stuck. And you hear a lot of things from the banking industry about, well, we'd like to make loans, but there aren't any good loans out there. Part of that's true. Whenever you go through an economic down cycle, like the one we've been through, obviously there's a tremendous business retraction. Many businesses, cut staff, cut capital projects, and do everything to survive. And clearly that went on in this country and in this state between, in 08 and 09 and 10. And so it is true that there just aren't as many projects to lend into. But another thing that's been going on, and I alluded to it earlier, as part of the reaction to the financial crisis, one of the things that's going to impact banking going forward, for the foreseeable future, much higher capital requirements. Banks are pretty leveraged institutions, and I won't get into all of that, but basically our capital requirements as an industry have been increased by almost 50%. And so when your capital requirements go up 50%, you can either make money and add to capital, get the investment community to give you capital, or you can shrink your balance sheet to fit your balance sheet into the capital stack that you have. And since there are a number of people from the business college here, I think enough people have had accounting that get what I'm talking about. And so that's a lot of what's been going on. So there have been some unintended consequences. In the big picture of things, I think that as both a banker and as a general citizen, I agree that the banking industry needed more capital. And one of the lessons that we've learned from this last financial crisis is we didn't have enough capital, particularly the mega banks didn't have enough capital. We need to put more at risk. But I think that the phase-in period for that additional capital has been very tough on the banking industry and very tough on the economy. So we've been able to run against the trend, and we've had that tremendous growth. So we've made a real difference in the state of Arizona because we've been one of the few banks to really grow and fuel the economic activity that's important for the business community. Bringing that down to Flagstaff, I want to talk about Sherry and her team. In northern Arizona, we opened in February of 2007, less than 6 years. Our total balances, our total footings are $244 million, deposits of about $115 million, and total loans of about $130 million. That's, Flagstaff, northern Arizona in general, that's during some pretty tough economic times, that's a pretty impressive achievement for a pretty small team of bankers. They're very focused, and so they are making a real difference every day in the business community here and have done a great job. And so I think you're fortunate here in this community to have as good of bankers as we have at Alliance Bank of Arizona. They've done a tremendous job. We've grown a lot. One of the ways we fund all that loans is with core deposits. And again, we're pleased to partner with NAU. One of the things that we've been working on over the last 4 or 5 years at our bank is trying to raise our profile with public institutions across the state. Cities, towns, counties, universities. The fact is, as much as we've grown, and now we're I think the 8th largest bank in the state banking, and we're the largest locally owned bank in the state, but the state banking landscape in terms of deposits are still controlled by the big 3. Primarily Chase and Wells is the really big 2, and B of A here in this market is a little bit that also ran. But those 3 banks control over 70% of the deposits in Arizona, and they and their predecessors in the banking industry, many of you know them, it used to control even more. It used to be over 80%. So, but they probably, partly because of history, partly because they're in all of the communities, and partly because, you know, controllers or business managers for public institutions probably aren't going to get fired if they move from Chase to Wells, but if they move to some community bank, well, should you do that or not? Over 95% of the public money in the state of Arizona, from fire districts to cities to towns to universities, is with one of the 3 big banks. And given the fact that the banking industry in general has been very flat in terms of loan growth, and the 3 big banks have been very flat in the Arizona market, I keep asking the question, you know, why should public institutions continue to, you know, have the bulk of their deposits go with, you know, very large banks controlled elsewhere? Because we need to turn that money around and lend it out in our communities, which is what we've done. So we've really focused on that, and in the last 4 years, over $300 million in the deposits that we've generated at Alliance Bank of Arizona have come from the public sector. Probably our largest single depository is the University of Arizona. And we have, actually, the last time I checked, we have over $100 million of University of Arizona's money. So one of the things that we're working on with the public sector, one of the reasons we're pleased to be to team up with NAU, is we want to send the message out to public institutions in Arizona that we are an Arizona-focused bank, we're an Arizona-headquartered bank. We put the money out, and are making this economy grow, but we have to have the fuel for that fire. So that's enough of that sales pitch, and I'll let Sherry follow up with it, which I know she will. But at any rate, I've gone on and talked a little bit longer than I intended to even. But at the end of the day, we've achieved that growth, and are actually, at the same time, you might say, well, okay, they've been growing fast, but this is a tough economy. You know, is this bank safe? Are they making provident loans? If all the other bankers said they can't find good loans to make, what are they doing down there? Our loan metrics, and you know, I can refer any of you to FDIC.gov, or if you're really interested, you can get with Sherry, Rob, or Greg, and they can show you the numbers. Our credit quality metrics and other ways that banks get measured by either rating services or you know, the industry in general are all much better than our peers as well. So we've been able to combine, you know, rapid growth in a tough time with actually better metrics than almost all of our peer group. And that leads me to the last point I want to make. It really all depends on our people. We're a service industry, and service industries, no matter how you talk about it, the latest widget or whatever, it ultimately all gets down to people. And our people are deeply, you know, they're very talented, you know, just like Sherry had to remind the professor that she got an A in that class. She reminds me every once in a while that she does pretty well too. But all kidding aside, we really have great people who are really committed to the state, who really understand. Robert Sarver, I mentioned him already. He grew up in Tucson, many of you know. He started his first bank at age 23 in Tucson, raised the money himself as a 23-year-old guy, raised $4 million in capital from the general business community. Pretty tough trick when you're 23 years old. Sherry and I and Dwayne worked together in another life, but all of us have been in Arizona, understand our markets, and are committed to the state. And so ultimately that's the secret and why we've been able to do what a lot of banks haven't done and run counter to the industry. So that's a little bit longer commercial than, you know, I would normally make in a deal like this where you just, you know, cut the ribbon or say we're pleased to be here, we're pleased to sponsor. We are. When we think that, and one last thing, you know, we got Scott, and who's the other? Tony. We've got a couple of your graduates. Scott started here with our bank a couple of years ago, doing a real good job. And we have another graduate that was working here that we sent to Mesa last week to work in our underwriting, our centralized underwriting environment. She's a real bright young woman. And so we just hired an intern. I just met him today. He's a senior here, so I hope he'll also get an A. But anyway, so we're really committed to all of our communities, particularly Northern Arizona. We're really proud to be affiliated with NAU, and we look forward to this partnership for a long time to come. So thank you for having us and for listening to us.